the world didn't end with a bang. It ended with a slow, sickening slide into oblivion. One moment, the tires were biting into asphalt, a desperate, tenuous connection to a road that had become a ghost. The next, a high-pitched scream of rubber on ice filled the small car, a sound of pure mechanical terror. The vehicle pirouetted in a horrifyingly graceful arc, dancing on the very edge of a cliff that dropped into a churning, bottomless void of white. His daughter Eurostrade's window was inches from the abyss. For a single, eternal heartbeat, Angel wrestled with a wheel, his own heart a frantic bird beating against the cage of his ribs. He managed to correct, a sob tearing from his throat, but the momentum was lost. The car Eurostrade's rear end whipped around, and they slid, not with violence, but with a gentle, inexorable finality, into the deep, soft powder of the embankment. There was a final, guttural groan of tortured metal scraping against rock, and then they were still, tilted at an angle that made the world feel drunk and wrong, buried deep within a snowdrift. A profound, ringing silence descended, a silence so complete it was louder and more terrifying than the howling blizzard outside. The engine was dead. The frantic pulse of the windshield wipers was gone. And in that suffocating quiet, Angel knew with a certainty that chilled him more than the Arctic air, that they were utterly, hopelessly lost. A single, sane fragment of Angela Eurostrade's consciousness screamed at him that this entire venture had been born of desperation and folly. The modest sedan, a creature of city streets and predictable weather, was never designed to conquer the savage spine of a mountain. The pass itself was a treacherous serpent of pavement, winding its way into a sky bruised purple and black with a coming storm, and now it was being entombed in snow. What had begun an hour before as a gentle, almost magical flurry of flax or euros fat and delicate, the kind that had made Meyer press her face to the glass in wide-eyed wonder, euros had mutated into a vicious, horizontal onslaught. The snow was no longer falling, it was being fired at them, a relentless fusillade from the fist of an enraged and invisible god. The world beyond the windows had dissolved into a maelstrom of white, a chaotic vortex where visibility was a forgotten luxury and the road ahead was nothing more than an article of blind faith. "Papa, are we getting close to the big forest?" Mayor Eurostrade's voice, a small, unwavering beacon in the roaring chaos, cut through his panic. At 7 years old, she was possessed by a voracious curiosity for the world, a trait that was both the singular joy and the most profound terror of Angela Eurostrade's existence. She wasn't afraid, not yet. To her, this was a grand adventure, a scene torn from the pages of her favorite fantasy novels, where courageous heroes traversed the frozen wastes on a noble quest. Just a little further, sweet pea, Angel lied, his knuckles straining against the steering wheel, a stark white ridge of bone. The car Eurostrade's heater was fighting a valiant but losing war against the creeping, spectral cold that bled through the windows. His own scent, typically a comforting mix of aged paper and chamomile tea from the little bookshop he once owned, now felt thin and sharp, tainted by the bitter, metallic tang of his own fear. He took a deep, shuddering breath, trying to swallow it down, to project an aura of calm that felt like a cheap costume. He prayed, with everything he had, that Meyer couldn't smell his terror, that the carefully constructed mask of the capable father was holding firm. The ranger station is just around the next bend. It was another lie. He had absolutely no idea where the ranger station was. The plan, if one could call it that, had been a frantic, desperate scribble on a cheap gas station marker, euros, a jagged line pointing to an insignificant speck lost in the sprawling wilderness of the national park. It was a place he Eurostrade D chosen precisely because of its obscurity. A place Mark, with all his resources and influence, would never think to search. A place without security cameras, without powerful connections, without the crushing, suffocating weight of his name. It was a place where a person, if they were lucky, could simply vanish. Vanishing is for criminals and cowards, Angel. Tell me, which one are you? Marker Eurostrade's voice, a ghost in his memory, was as smooth and reasonable as ever. It was the voice he always used when he was being his most cruel, a silken tone that delivered 1,000 tiny, invisible cuts. That particular question wasn't Eurostrade the final straw, but it was one of the many that had broken him. The true final straw had been something much quieter and infinitely more devastating. It had been about a drawing. Meyer had poured her entire 7-year-old soul into a magnificent, sprawling masterpiece. It depicted a family of rainbow-colored squirrels who lived in a tree made of shimmering crystals. It was a chaotic, exuberant, and utterly brilliant explosion of life. She had presented it to Mark with a proud flourish when he returned home from work. He had taken it, studying it for a long, silent moment, his impossibly handsome face arranged into a mask of thoughtful concern. He didn't comment on the vibrant colors or the charmingly asymmetrical squirrels. Instead, he knelt down, placing a gentle, proprietary hand on Mayor Eurostrade's shoulder. Eater Eurostrade's Ria Euros spirited, darling, he had said, his voice as soft as cashmere, as cold as steel. But the lines, their Eurostrade re so unruly. There are Eurostrade's no structure, you see. A mind requires structure to truly thrive. An imagination, left to run wild like this, can easily become a liability. He then looked up at Angel, his eyes conveying a look of shared parental gravity that was entirely performative. We really need to revisit our conversation about that special academy. The one with the more Euros rigorous curriculum. We simply cannot allow her to fall behind. He wasn't talking about education. He was talking about control. He wanted to take the brilliant, jagged, beautiful edges of Mayor Eurostrade's personality and sand them down until she was as smooth, as polished, and as lifeless as the imported marble that lined their foyer. He wanted to place her in a gilded cage, just as he had done with her father. That night, after the steady, rhythmic sound of Mark Eurostrade's breathing filled the cavernous bedroom, Angel had packed their escape. He took the emergency cash he had painstakingly siphoned from his online shop, a small business that specialized in rare literary prints. Mark had gently persuaded him it was a lovely little hobby, but far too stressful for someone with your delicate constitution. He packed their warmest clothes, Mayor Eurostrade's most treasured books, and the drawing of the rainbow squirrels. He left behind the designer wardrobe Mark had curated for him, the obscenely expensive watch that felt more like a shackle, and the suffocating, hollow illusion of their perfect life. He had finally run, not from a man who raised his hand, but from a man who was meticulously, lovingly, and systematically erasing him from existence. A sudden, savage gust of wind slammed into the car, a physical, violent blow that shoved them hard towards the shoulder of the invisible road. Angela Eurostrade's heart rocketed into his throat as he fought the wheel, his muscles screaming with a strain. The tires spun uselessly, that high, panicked whine returning as they found a hidden sheet of black ice. For that terrifying, eternal second, the car teetered on the brink, a sheer, dizzying drop into a white, bottomless chasm just feet from where his daughter sat. He wrenched the wheel, his breath catching in a sob, and the back end fishtailed violently in the opposite direction. Papar, Mayor Eurostrade's voice was small now, the bright thread of adventure finally frayed by the raw texture of fear. Eater Eurostrade's okay. Eater Eurostrade's just a bumpy patch. Hold on tight, he yelled, his voice a raw, unconvincing rasp. The world devolved into a slow-motion nightmare. It wasn't the violent, explosive crash he had always imagined. It was a gentle, horrifying surrender, a total loss of traction, a sickening lurch as the front tire caught the deep, soft snow of the embankment. There was that final, grinding crunch as the car Eurostrade's underbelly scraped against something hard and unseen, and then it settled, tilted at its nauseating angle, swallowed by the snowdrift. And then silence. That profound, ringing silence that was somehow louder than the storm. The engine had stalled. He turned the key in the ignition. A dull, impotent click was his only reply. He tried again, twisting his wrist until the plastic groaned in protest. Click. Nothing. The battery was dead. The engine was cold. The car had become their tomb. They were stranded. And in that precise moment, a cold, venomous whisper slithered into the deepest recesses of his heart. Mark had been right all along. He was a coward and a fool. The cold was their first true enemy. It was a tangible entity, a patient, knowing predator that clawed at the edges of their fragile shelter. Angel retrieved their emergency blanket from the trunk, a flimsy silver sheet that felt like a pathetic joke against the stormer Eurostrade's unbridled fury. He scrambled into the backseat, wrapping it first around Meyer, then around himself, creating a tiny shared cocoon. Their combined body heat felt like a pitifully small candle against an Arctic gale. "We Eurostrade going to play a new game, sweet pea," he whispered, his own teeth chattering so violently he could barely form the words. His breath plumed in the frigid air, each exhale a visible cloud, a tangible measure of their dwindling life force. Eater Eurostrade's called the hibernating bear game. The rules are, we have to stay very still and very quiet in our cave and wait for the sun to come out. Meyer, ever the pragmatist, simply nodded. Her dark curls poked out from beneath her woolen hat, her small face pale and luminous in the gloom. "Will a hero come for us soon, Papar?" Like in a circumflex Euros the night of the frozen mountain a Eurostrade. Hot, sharp tears pricked at the back of Angela Eurostrade's eyes, freezing almost instantly on his lashes. "Vater Eurostrade's right, my love. The night of the frozen mountain is on his way." He held her close, burying his face in her hair, the scent of milk and innocent childhood a heartbreakingly beautiful comfort. He listened to the wind, a lonely, mournful howl that seemed to be scouring the world clean, erasing every trace of their existence. An hour crawled by, marked only by the slow, creeping numbness that was claiming his feet. Then another. The weak, gray light outside began to fade, bleeding into a deep, bruised purple. The cold was winning. Mayor Eurostrade's shivering had subsided, replaced by a lethargic stillness that sent a spear of pure, adulterated terror through his heart. He was failing her. His beautiful, brilliant, rainbow squirrel-drawing daughter was going to freeze to death because he had been a fool, because he had been weak for so many years, and then fatally rash when he Eurostrade finally found the courage to be strong. He closed his eyes, his own body now trembling uncontrollably, and offered a final, desperate prayer to a god he wasn't sure he believed in, for a hero he knew wasn't a Eurostrade coming. The rule was absolute, no variables. Variables were the unpredictable factors that got men killed. A sudden, unexpected shift in wind direction during a snippery Eurostrade S shot. An unseen civilian wandering into the kill zone, a piece of faulty intelligence that turned a routine extraction into a bloodbath. For the past 7 years, Gabriella Eurostrade's life had been a relentless, almost monastic exercise in the systematic elimination of variables. His cabin was laid out with the geometric precision of a military barracks. His pantry was stocked in a predictable, 6-month rotation. His days as a park ranger followed a rigid, looping schedule of patrols and maintenance. He and his son, Cody, moved in a quiet, practiced orbit around each other, their shared silence a comfortable, well-worn blanket against the world. The variable, when it finally arrived, was a line. A faint, unnatural trough carved into the fresh snow, leading off the winding Northern Service road he was patrolling on his snowmobile. It was almost invisible, already being erased by the blizzard's relentless brush, but to Gabriella Eurostrade's trained eye, it was wrong. It was a discordant note in the carefully composed symphony of his ordered world. A cold, familiar tension coiled deep in his gut. The part of him he privately called the wolf stirred in its cage. This wolf wasn't a creature of fur and fang. It was a thing of memory and instinct. A hyper-efficient predator forged in the dust of Kandahar and honed in the sterile, air-conditioned debriefing rooms that followed. It was the soldier who had never been fully decommissioned. When the wolf was close to the surface, the world sharpened to a razory Eurostrade's edge. Colors became more vivid, sounds more distinct. The scent of pine and ozone from the storm intensified until it was almost a taste in the back of his throat. He felt the low-frequency hum of the snowmobiler Eurostrade's engine not in his ears, but in the bones of his teeth. The howl of the wind was no longer just wind, it was the distant, shrieking whine of an incoming rocket-propelled grenade. He throttled down, the engine settling into a low, guttural growl. Cody, perched behind him, a silent, miniature version of Gabriel in his own thermal gear, didn't speak. At 8 years old, he understood this shift in his father better than any adult ever could. He Eurostrade seen it before. He simply went still, his small body rigid, his gaze watchful and serious. Gabriel dismounted, his heavy boots sinking into the deep powder. The cold was a clean, biting thing, and he welcomed it. It cut through the fog of memory, grounding him in the present. He followed the line, his movements economical and precise, his eyes scanning the trees, his body automatically charting angles of approach and assessing potential cover. 50 feet down the embankment, half buried like the fossil of some long-dead leviathan, was a car. A dark sedan, civilian, a catastrophic variable. His protocol was clear: call it in, report the GPS coordinates, and let the county search and rescue team handle it. That was the rule. No engagement, no personal involvement. But the radio was spitting nothing but static. The storm, too thick to punch a signal through the mountains. And waiting, he knew from the rapid drop in temperature, could take hours. Hours they probably didn't have. The Wolfer Eurostrade's logic was cold, simple, and merciless. Survival of the fittest. They made a mistake coming up here unprepared. Their mistake is not your responsibility. An unknown element is a threat. Neutralize the threat by maintaining distance. Protect your own. Protect Cody. He moved closer, every sense on high alert. There were no footprints leading away from the vehicle. They were still inside, or what was left of them. The wolf saw a potential complication, a messy situation to be avoided. The man, who was Gabriel, the father, saw a potential tragedy. He reached the driver Eurostrade's side window and wiped away a thick patch of snow with his gloved hand. His breath caught in his chest in a way that had nothing to do with the cold. Inside, huddled in the back seat under a flimsy silver blanket, were two people. An Omader, he registered instantly from the delicate lines of the Murner Eurostrade's face, which was now pale and bluish with cold, and a child, a little girl, tucked tightly into his side. They were both terrifyingly still. The wolf snarled in his mind. A pup, a liability. They will be weak, compromised. They will slow you down. They will bring their chaos into our sanctuary. But the man who was Gabriel, the man whose own son was sitting safely on a snowmobile 50 feet away, saw the faint puff of condensation that bloomed on the glass in front of the little girl Eurostrade's face. It was a fragile, fleeting proof of life. The comparison between the child in the car and the child on the hill was a physical blow. The Wolfer Eurostrade's cold, hard logic shattered against the brute force of that single, warm breath. He had no choice. He was about to break every single rule he had built to keep himself and his son safe. He rapped his gloved knuckle sharply on the glass. The Emperor Eurostrade's head jerked up. His eyes, when they flew open, were a startling shade of green, wide with a terror so profound it was almost primal. It was the look of a cornered animal, assessing a new and larger predator that had just appeared at the mouth of its den. Gabriel felt a low growl rumble deep in his chest, an involuntary, possessive alpha response to the Emperor Eurostrade's overwhelming distress scent. He suppressed it instantly, a wave of self-loathing washing over him. This is why you stay away. This is the monster. He held up his hands, palms open, a universal sign of non-aggression he Eurostrade used 1,000 times in dusty villages where his presence meant both salvation and death. He managed to wrench the frozen door open. The blast of frigid air that escaped the car Eurostrade's interior told him just how little time they had left. "I'll Eurostrade Emma Park Ranger," he said, his voice a rough, gravelly thing, rusted from disuse. He forced himself to keep his tone flat, neutral, tactical. "You need to come with me." Now, the Omega Angel could only stare. The man who had materialized out of the blizzard was a giant, a figure carved from the mountain itself. He was bundled in layers of tactical gear, his face obscured by a snow-dusted beard and the deep shadow cast by his hood. His scent flooded the small car, a powerful, overwhelming wave of pine trees, cold stone, and something else, something sharp and dangerous, like the air after a lightning strike. He was an alpha, a powerful one. Angela Eurostrade's every instinct, honed by years of living with Mark, screamed at him to run, to placate, to do whatever it took to protect his daughter from this new, unknown threat. But Meyer stirred against him, her voice a faint, sleepy murmur, her words slurring with the insidious onset of cold. A hero the Marna Eurostrade's gaze, a startlingly intense amber, softened for a fraction of a second as he looked at Meyer. Then it hardened again, locking onto Angel. He was assessing, calculating, weighing their chances. "Your daughter is in the first stages of hypothermia," he stated. The words clipped, factual, stripped of all emotion. "My cabin is 1.6 kilometers from this location. Eater Eurostrade's your only chance of survival." It was the lack of choice, the brutal, unsparing finality of his words, that finally broke through Angela Eurostrade's fear-induced paralysis. There was no other option. He nodded, a jerky, stiff movement of his frozen neck. The ranger worked with a terrifying efficiency that was both deeply frightening and strangely reassuring. He checked Mayor Eurostrade's vitals with a practiced, impersonal touch, then bundled her more securely in the emergency blanket before lifting her effortlessly from Angela Eurostrade's arms. He turned back to Angel. "Can you walk?" Angel tried to force his frozen limbs to obey, but his legs were numb, his body locked in a violent, full-body shiver that was stealing the last of his strength. He shook his head, a wave of shame washing over him at his own weakness. Without another word, the man helped him out of the car, half lifting, half dragging him up the steep, snow-choked embankment. Angel was acutely aware of the solid wall of muscle at his back, the raw power held in careful, controlled check. This man wasn't Eurostrade just strong, he was dangerous. The way he moved, the way his eyes scanned the treeline even in the blinding snow, it was the economy of motion of a trained soldier. Marker Eurostrade's power was in his words, his influence, his wealth. This Marner Eurostrade's power was in his very bones. At the top of the ridge, the little boy was waiting by the snowmobile, his face a mask of solemn concern. He looked between the ranger, his father, and the two half-frozen strangers, his gaze lingering on Meyer, who was now stirring feebly in her rescuer Eurostrade's arms. The ranger settled Meyer securely in front of his son. "Hold her, Cody." Donna Eurostrade let her go. The boy just nodded, his small arms wrapping around Meyer with a seriousness that seemed far too old for his face. Then the ranger turned and, with the same unnerving lack of effort, lifted Angel onto the seat behind him. "Hold on," he commanded. The words were not her suggestion. Angel wrapped his trembling arms around the Marner Eurostrade's solid torso, his face pressed against the rough, cold fabric of his jacket. The engine roared to life, and they plunged back into the white fury of the storm. As they sped through the disorienting, featureless landscape, Angel was overwhelmed by the Alpha Eurostrade's scent, by the solid, unyielding heat of his body radiating through the layers of clothing. He was being carried away by a monster into the heart of a blizzard, and for the first time in days, a treacherous, terrifying part of him felt completely and utterly safe. Gabriella Eurostrade's cabin was less a home and more a defensive position. It was built of thick, dark logs that had been expertly chinked against the wind, with small, strategically placed windows and a heavy, iron-strapped oak door that looked like it could withstand a battering ram. Inside, it was Spartan and obsessively clean. A single large room served as the living space, dominated by a massive stone fireplace on one wall. A scarred wooden table with 4 simple chairs and 2 worn leather armchairs were the only furniture. A small, functional kitchen was tucked into one corner, every pot and utensil hanging from a designated hook. A sturdy ladder led up to a sleeping loft. Every object had its place, every surface was clear. It was a fortress built against the chaos of the outside world, and more importantly, against the chaos within himself. Bringing them inside felt like a physical violation of his sanctuary. Angel and Mayor Eurostrade's sensu euros, the Ongar Eurostrade's calming chamomile and old paper, and the Childer Eurostrade's milky sweetness, both laced with a sharp, acidic tang of Fira Euros, were an invasion of his sterile, controlled environment. They clung to the air, tingling with the familiar smells of wood smoke and cedar. His wolf paced the confines of his mind, snarling at the intrusion, at the breach in his perimeter. He deposited Meyer gently onto the thick bearskin rug in front of the roaring fire Eurostrade built up before his patrol. Cody was right there, a silent shadow already chafing her small, frozen hands between his own. Gabriel turned back to Angel, who stood shivering just inside the door, his wide green eyes taking in the Spartan room. He looked like a frightened deer, ready to bolt at the slightest provocation, yet too frozen to move. He looked so fragile, so utterly out of place. The sight triggered an unwelcome, protective instinct in Gabriel that felt dangerously close to the Wolfer Eurostrade's possessiveness. He fought it down, his jaw tightening. "Take off your wet things," Gabriel ordered, his voice coming out harsher than he intended. He threw a thick, clean wool blanket onto one of the armchairs. It landed with a soft thud. "There are Eurostrade's a bathroom through there. Hot water is limited. Be quick." He turned away before Angel could respond, busying himself at the stove, putting a heavy cast-iron pot on to heat a simple stew. He needed to focus on a task, a procedure for rewarming hypothermia victims. Step 1. Remove wet clothing. Step 2. Provide warm, dry layers. Step 3. Administer warm, sweet fluids. Step 4. Monitor vitals. Focusing on the protocol kept the wolf at bay. It kept the man from having to feel. When Angel emerged from the bathroom, he was wrapped in the blanket, his damp clothes left behind. Eurostrade found a comb somewhere and had tried to tame his dark, wet curls. He looked younger now, softer, but the fear was still etched into the lines around his eyes. He moved to the hearth and knelt by his daughter, his touch on her forehead gentle and reassuring. Angel began to murmur to her, his voice a low, soothing hum that was barely audible above the storm. The silence in the cabin was thick and heavy, punctuated only by the crackle of the fire, the scream of the wind outside, and Angela Eurostrade's soft humming. Cody, in a rare, bold move that startled Gabriel, broke it. He retrieved a small, intricately carved wooden bird from the mantelpiece and held it out to Meyer. "I made it," he said, his voice soft but clear. Meyer, who was slowly regaining her color in the radiant heat, took the bird, her small fingers tracing the smooth lines of the wood. "Eater Eurostrade's a blue jay," she said, her voice a little hoarse but full of her innate, bookish curiosity. "Thayer Eurostrade re very smart. Did you know they can mimic the calls of hawks to scare other birds away from food sources? Eater Eurostrade's a behavior called aggressive mimicry." Coditor Eurostrade's eyes widened slightly, a flicker of surprised delight on his usually serious face. He lived in a world of silent observation and action. This tiny, pale girl was a walking encyclopedia of incredible facts. "I didn't Eurostrade know that," he admitted, a note of awe in his voice. "I have a book about them," Meyer continued, her confidence growing as she settled into a topic she loved. "It has pictures of their nests. They use mud and twigs to hold them together, like little cups." And just like that, the spell of tense, adult silence was broken. The children, unburdened by the complex histories and primal fears of their fathers, had found a common language. Gabriel watched the exchange from the corner of his eye as he stirred the stew, a tight, aching knot forming in his chest. He saw the way Mayor Eurostrade's presence seemed to draw his own quiet, watchful son out of his shell, coaxing a rare, small smile from him that Gabriel hadn't seen in months. Angel looked up then, as if feeling the weight of his gaze, and caught him watching. For a long moment, their eyes met across the room. Angela Eurostrade's gaze was full of 1,000 questions, but the overwhelming terror that had been there before was now replaced by a cautious, searching curiosity. In Gabriella Eurostrade's intense, amber stare, he saw not malice, but a profound, bone-deep weariness. He saw the way Gabriella Eurostrade's gaze lingered on the children, an unguarded softness in his expression before a shutter slammed down, hiding it away again. This man wasn't just a monster. He was a father. The realization settled something deep inside him, a small, solid anchor in the churning sea of his fear. Later, they ate the stew in near silence at the heavy wooden table. The children, sitting side by side, kept up a quiet, whispered chatter about birds and carved animals and the best kinds of trees for climbing. The stew was simply Euros venison, potatoes, carrots Euros, but to Angel, it was the most satisfying meal he had ever eaten. It was warm and real and, most importantly, safe. As he ate, he studied his rescuer. He saw the things a casual observer would miss, things he was now uniquely attuned to after his years with Mark. The way Gabriel never sat with his back to the door, positioning himself to command a view of the room's two entrances Euros, the door and the ladder to the loft. The way his eyes constantly, almost imperceptibly, scanned the room, cataloging exits and potential threats. The almost invisible tension in his broad shoulders that never truly dissolved, even when he reached for the salt. It wasn't the posture of a simple park ranger. It was the posture of a man who had seen war, a man who was, in many ways, still living in one. The wolf in Gabriella Eurostrade's head was quieter now, lulled by the warmth, the food, and the low murmur of the children Eurostrade's voices. But it was still there, watching through his eyes. It watched the graceful, efficient way Angel moved, the gentle patience in his hands as he helped his daughter cut her meat into smaller pieces. It registered the Antar Eurostrade's calming scent, not as a threat, but as an anomaly it couldn't Eurostrade classify. The scent of chamomile and old books was Euros soothing. It was like a cool hand on a fevered brow, lowering the frantic, high-frequency baseline of anxiety that was his constant companion. The realization was deeply unsettling. He felt the muscles in his jaw tighten. Calm was a vulnerability. Calm got you killed. After the meal, Angel tucked a sleepy Meyer into a bedroll Cody had helped him make near the fire. He stood and turned to face his host, who was cleaning the dishes with methodical, almost violent precision. "Thank you," he said, his voice quiet but clear over the sound of running water. "You saved our lives." Gabriel just grunted in response, his back to him, his gaze fixed on the task at hand. He couldn't accept the gratitude. He had brought a variable, a massive, unpredictable variable, into his fortress. He had broken his most important rule. He didn't Eurostrade feel like a hero. He felt like a fool who had just lit a beacon on a dark mountain, inviting a world of unknown dangers into his carefully constructed peace. The storm raged on outside, a physical manifestation of the turmoil within the Cabina Eurostrade's thick walls. But inside, for the first time in a long, long time, two children slept soundly, feeling utterly safe. And two fathers, both haunted by their own kinds of monsters, stood watch in the flickering firelight, a fragile, unspoken truce settling between them in the heart of the storm. The shelter, for now, was holding. The second day dawned with a fragile and deceptive peace. Angel woke before the sun, his body stiff and sore from a night spent contorted in a leather armchair. For a disorienting moment, suspended between sleep and awareness, he didn't Eurostrade know where he was. The air smelled of cold embers, cedar wood, and something else. Something wild and deeply masculine, like pine needles crushed on winter stone. Then memory returned in a tidal wave of the blizzard, the crash, the mountain, the man. His eyes shot to the hearth. In the pre-dawn gloom, illuminated by the dying orange glow of the coals, he saw them. Meyer and the boy, Cody, were nestled together in their bedrolls, their small forms rising and falling in the easy, untroubled rhythm of sleep. Mayor Eurostrade's hand was curled near Kada Eurostrade's, the small, carved blue jay clutched tightly in her fingers. A wave of relief so profound it felt like a physical blow washed over Angel, and he had to press a hand to his mouth to stifle a sob. She was safe. She was warm. For one more night, he had not failed her. Moving with a silence born of long practice, he got up and added a few logs to the fire, gently coaxing the embers back to life. The cabin was even more intimidating in the silent gray of morning. It was a space stripped of all sentimentality, of all personal history. There were no photographs on the mantel, no childish drawings taped to the walls, no comforting clutter of daily life. It was the immaculate, impersonal den of a man who did not so much live in a space as he occupied it. It reminded him, with an unnerving jolt, of Marker Eurostrade's penthouse, where every object was a curated piece of art and any personal touch was deemed a mess. But this was different. Marker Eurostrade's world was a gilded cage designed to impress outsiders. This felt like a fortress built not for show, but to keep the world, and perhaps parts of himself, locked out. He found coffee and, moving with a practiced quietness honed by years of not wanting to wake a sleeping, irritable Mark, started a pot brewing on the stove. The simple, domestic act was grounding. It was a small piece of normalcy in a world that had been turned completely upside down. As the rich, dark aroma began to fill the cabin, he felt a sliver of his own agency return. He was not just a victim, a refugee. He could still make coffee. A floorboard creaked in the loft above. A moment later, Gabriel descended the ladder. He moved with a startling silence for such a large man, his bare feet making no sound on the wood. He was wearing only a pair of gray sweatpants, and in the growing light filtering through the small windows, Angel could see the landscape of his body for the very first time. He was corded with dense, functional muscle, his broad back and shoulders a tapestry of old, faded scars that spoke of a life of violence Angel couldn't begin to imagine. He stopped at the bottom of the ladder when he saw Angel standing by the stove, his body instantly tensing, the relaxed lines of sleep vanishing into a guarded, watchful stillness. "Coffee Eurostrade's on," Angel said, his voice barely a whisper, suddenly feeling like an intruder again, a trespasser in this Marna Eurostrade's rigidly controlled world. Gabriel didn't Eurostrade reply. His amber eyes scanned the room, a quick, systematic sweep that took in the children on the hearth, the freshly stoked fire, the brewing coffee, and finally, Angel himself. It was a practiced assessment, a threat analysis performed every morning out of pure, ingrained instinct. He gave a short, sharp nod of acknowledgement and moved to the sink, splashing cold water on his face from the hand pump. The silence between them was a living thing, heavy and awkward and thick with unspoken questions. Angel poured 2 mugs of coffee, placing one on the scarred wooden table for the other man. They stood on opposite sides of the room, 2 solitary planets in a cold, silent orbit, each holding a warm mug as the blizzard continued its assault on the world outside. Angel had escaped one cage only to find himself in another, but this one, he was beginning to realize, wasn't built to keep him in. It was built to keep a monster from getting out. The storm may have trapped them, but a far more complicated tempest was brewing within the 4 walls of the cabin. They had survived the mountain, but now they had to survive each other. What horrors from his past made a man like Gabriel build such a fortress around his heart? And could a fragile Omega and his daughter ever find true safety in the shadow of its walls? Let me know your theories in the comments below. And if you're as invested in their story as I am, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next chapter.